Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Maybe it was the coveralls. Maybe it was the way she didn't push back. Or maybe it was because they had no idea who she really was. The clamor of voices filled the hangar's control bay. Pilots in sharp flight suits paced, swaggered, and traded inside jokes about their upcoming runs. One leaned back in his chair, boots up, as he plotted out simulated strikes across hostile territory. In the back, nearly invisible against the hum of activity, Senior Airman Maya Torres scribbled notes on a clipboard. Her hair was tied in a regulation bun, her face calm, unreadable. Her uniform bore a single patch. Torres. Maintenance. No flashy wings, no flight medals, no name known in elite circles. But her eyes flicked across every instrument panel, every cockpit screen, every line of diagnostics, absorbing it all. She wasn't supposed to be there, not in that way, yet there. She was working the morning shift in Hangar 18, the most classified corner of Nellis Air Force Base, a place so secure that even the janitors had top-secret clearance. The B-21 Raider stood before her, silent and lethal, worth more than the GDP of some countries. It was the jewel of American air power. 12 pilots in the world were cleared to fly it, and all 12 carried themselves like royalty. Maya had no crown. Instead, she had calloused fingers that traced panels others didn't even know existed. A mind wired for systems, patterns, anomalies, things that didn't scream but whispered. Whispers most ignored. Torres, barked Master Sergeant Rodriguez, his voice cutting across the hangar. You missed a hydraulic leak on Raider 07 yesterday. Captain Morrison had to abort. Maya looked up, her face unreadable. She hadn't missed anything. The system had checked out perfectly, but she'd learned a long time ago. Challenging. A senior NCO in public wasn't worth it. I'll double-check my procedures, Sergeant, she said. On the second-floor observation deck, Captain Jake Morrison watched the exchange with casual disdain. Clean-shaven, fresh flight suit, polished boots, and an ego that could survive a missile strike. She's probably good with a wrench, he muttered to his wingman, Lieutenant Sarah Webb. But let's be honest, there's a reason some people fix planes, and others fly them. Webb didn't reply, because something about Torres, the way she moved around the Raider, the precise dance of her fingers on carbon fiber. Hull seemed different, non-mechanical, intimate. The mission briefing was standard. Low-altitude stealth penetration through a simulated enemy radar envelope. Standard, except for one detail Maya couldn't ignore: the weather. The forecast had changed, fast. And only she seemed to notice. Captain Morrison dismissed it, just like he dismissed everything she said. Minor thermal fluctuation in the port engine? He laughed. These babies are built to fly through hell. A little temperature tickle won't stop us. Maya didn't flinch. Sir, I recommend an inspection of the thermal management system before any long-duration flight. The patent I'm seeing could Torres, he cut in. They pay me to fly it. You keep the oil topped off. Chuckles rippled through the nearby tech crew. Even Webb smiled, though less from humor than habit. But Master Sergeant Rodriguez didn't laugh, because he'd seen Torres' diagnostics, and deep down, even he couldn't explain how she saw what no one else could. By 1400 hours, the B-21s were airborne. Phantom 01 and Phantom 02. Flying point through the red flag exercise zone. Below them, a desert storm began to twist the horizon into a field of bruised clouds and shearing winds. Control confirmed all systems. We're green. Captain Morrison smiled into his oxygen mask. See, Torres? He said over comms. Still flying, but below. Maya was watching telemetry feed from the hangar control station. Alone, quiet, focused, and something was wrong. The engine temperatures weren't spiking, but they were dancing, oscillating in ways that didn't match altitude or atmospheric pressure. Subtle, hidden between lines of code, pattern recognition. That's what had made her a test pilot. That's why they buried her under a maintenance patch instead of sending her to war, because She knew how things failed before they failed. Rodriguez leaned over her shoulder. "What are you seeing?" Maya pointed. "Cooling systems are overcompensating for fluctuating density altitudes. If they stay in that storm belt, the thermal regulation curve's going to break. All within parameters," he replied cautiously. "For now," she said. "But we're 2 degrees and 20 minutes from cascade failure." Rodriguez exhaled. "That's a hell of a guess." "It's not a guess." Phantom 01 began reporting anomalies. Not failures, just weirdness, turbulence, odd delays in thrust response, indicators blinking on, then off again. Webb noticed it first. Morrison brushed it off. "This thing practically flies itself," he said. But in Maya's gut, a cold certainty grew. And then the call came: emergency landing. Critical thermal management failure. Phantom 01 losing systems. Panic rippled through the control tower. Engineers scrambled. Commanders barked questions. And Maya stood. "I need access to flight control comms," she said. "Why?" Colonel Hawkins demanded. Maya looked her straight in the eye. "Because I designed the system, and right now, your pilot is flying blind." Why wasn't she in the pilot's seat to begin with? That was the question no one had dared to ask. Not until now, when everything was falling apart. And the only person who seemed calm was the one everyone had ignored. Colonel Hawkins stared at Maya, eyes narrowed. "You designed the system?" Maya nodded once. No hesitation. No theatrics. Thermal management, flight control redundancy, manual override sequences, all of it. "Your file says your maintenance." "My file says what it's supposed to say." The colonel didn't blink. "You're telling me Phantom 01 has maybe minutes left in the air, and you're the only person here who understands what's actually happening?" "Yes, ma'am, and Captain Morrison's never flown it in this condition." "But I have." For a beat, the room froze then. Clear her a direct line to Phantom 01. In the cockpit of Phantom 01, Captain Jake Morrison's world was unraveling. Controls. Sluggish, warnings cascading, power levels fluctuating. And worst of all, systems he didn't fully understand were going dark one by one. "I'm declaring an emergency," he transmitted. Voice steady despite the sweat beading under his helmet. "Multiple system failures. Flight control computers are dropping." Control's voice crackled in his headset. "Phantom 01, stand by for new instructions." Then another voice. Calm, clear, familiar. "Captain Morrison. This is Major Maya Torres." A pause. A beat too long. "Torres?" His voice cracked with disbelief. "Maintenance Torres?" "Negative, Captain. B-21 test pilot. Major Maya Torres, formerly of the Air Force Flight Test Center." Of Air Force Flight Test Center. "You're flying a system I've already landed under failure conditions." "I'm going to talk you through this." Morrison didn't answer at first. Because everything he thought he knew about her, about his own certainty, about his place in the hierarchy, had just cracked wide open at 30,000 feet. And because he needed her? "Understood, Major." He replied finally. "I'm listening." Back in the control tower, you could have heard a pin drop. Colonel Hawkins folded her arms. "Major, what are we dealing with?" Maya spoke quickly, eyes locked on the data screens. "The thermal system is failing in a cascade pattern. Automatic backups are overcompensating, causing power bleed into secondary control surfaces. Within 4 minutes, Morrison will lose all. Digital flight assistance. Manual override? Only if he flies it like a glider with rocket engines and no margin for error. And you've done this before? 3 times in simulation, twice in test airframes. The second time, I almost didn't walk away." Hawkins turned to her chief master sergeant. "Get her everything she needs." And just like that, the woman they'd called just a mechanic was now commanding a flight emergency that could cost lives and billions of dollars. "Captain, listen closely," Maya said over comms. "Disengage your auto-stabilization. You're gonna feel a lurch." Morrison's hands trembled slightly, but he did it. The raider jolted as if punched by the sky. Now pull left rudder gently. Don't trust your instincts. The B-21 stealth configuration reacts backwards at high speed without computer correction. His breath came hard. Aircraft's wobbling. Good. That means you're still in control. Now ease your throttle down. Cooling cycles can't keep up with full burn. From Phantom 02, Lieutenant Webb's voice chimed in. Concerned, Phantom 01, you're losing altitude. Deliberately. Maya answered for him. I'm putting him into a shallow descent. Less stress, more margin. In the tower, engineers and officers stood in stunned silence as Maya dictated procedures they hadn't even known existed. She wasn't just stabilizing Morrison. She was reprogramming the entire understanding of what made someone qualified, but even. As Maya guided him, Morrison fought guilt rising in his throat like acid. This was the woman he'd joked about, ignored, mocked. Now, her voice was the only thing keeping him alive. Major, he said, between corrections. I owe you an apology. It can wait, she said quietly. But let's be honest. If I told you who I was 3 weeks ago, would you have listened? He didn't answer. That was the answer. Then more warnings. Thermal spike. System redundancy failure. Critical coolant pressure drop. Maya's voice came fast now. Jake, listen to me. You're about to lose engine cooling. If that happens, the left engine will overheat and shut down. That's your yaw control gone. He didn't hesitate. Tell me what to do. Throttle cut to 40%. Lock your pitch trim manually. You're going to have to glide the last 3 miles. What? About landing gear? It may not deploy. You'll use manual crank under stress. You've got one chance, one runway. Don't flare too early. Outside the tower, the sky rumbled storm clouds, thick as wet cement. Rain streaked across the observation windows. Down below, emergency lights lit up the runway like a landing strip on the edge of the world. Control, this is Phantom 01, Morrison called, voice shaking but holding. Beginning emergency descent, request priority clearance. Granted, came the reply. Runway 3 is clear. Winds at 28 knots from the west. Emergency teams. In position. Maya leaned toward the mic. Captain, she said gently, you're doing fine. For the first time. Her voice held something softer, not just professionalism but care, quiet reassurance. A calm forged from pain no one had asked about, a life no one had cared to know. This aircraft will fight you until the end, she said, but you're going to land it because right now, it needs a pilot, not a computer. Morrison's voice was a whisper now. I'm ready. Inside the hangar, the crew watched the runway. Inside the tower, the officers stood still, and inside the cockpit, Captain Jake Morrison gritted his teeth and pulled the impossible toward the ground. A stealth bomber, no computers, no autopilot, only him, and the woman who had been hiding in plain sight all along. How do you land a $22 billion bomber when the plane itself wants you to fail? That was the question racing through Morrison's mind as the sleek black shape of Phantom 01 dipped below 10,000 feet, descending through a war zone of rain, wind shear, and failing systems. He gripped the stick tighter, his breathing shallow. Flight assist, gone. Stabilizers, unresponsive. Every instinct told him to level out, to pull back. But Maya's voice cut through the storm like steel wrapped in silk. Do not flare, not yet. Trust the aircraft's glide slope. You only get one chance. The instruments blinked erratically. Warning tones screamed in chorus. But Morrison wasn't flying on instruments anymore. He was flying on faith, in a voice that, for most of his career, he'd never have thought to trust. From the control tower, Maya stared at the descent path. Hand gripping the rail so hard her knuckles whitened. Beside her, Colonel Hawkins barely breathed. Landing gear? The colonel asked. Still not deployed. Maya replied. Manual crank sequence initiated. But even if it drops, the right side may not lock. So he's landing a bomber, with uneven gear. In a crosswind? Maya nodded grimly. And no flaps, the colonel muttered. God help him, Maya didn't respond. Because this wasn't about divine intervention. It was about physics, instinct. And a voice in the cockpit that knew what failure looked like before it arrived. Captain, Maya transmitted. 10 seconds to threshold. You're going to feel turbulence push you off centerline. Ride it. Do not overcorrect. Copy that. Morrison said, voice clipped, focused. A tone Maya recognized, the razor edge between panic and control. She'd flown there herself. Gears halfway. Webb reported from Phantom 02. Looks like partial lock, Morrison exhaled slowly. Just need enough to scrape the asphalt, right? Exactly, Maya answered. You're not landing this plane. You're negotiating with it. The nose dipped again. The storm slammed against the airframe. Buffeting it sideways, Morrison made a minute adjustment. Barely a tap to the stick. Was starting to feel it now. Her language. The way this aircraft spoke when everything else shut up. The subtle dance of forces that couldn't be trained into muscle memory, but had to be lived. And she had lived it. That thought echoed as the runway lights flared into view through the mist, bright and trembling like stars on a crashing horizon. Back in the tower, silence stretched like piano wire. Then contact. The front gear hit first. Harder than protocol would ever allow, sparks flew. Then the left. The right side stuttered, dragged. Maya clenched her jaw. Slam. The B-21 rocked violently. The airframe flexing under the uneven impact, but it held. Brakes engaged. Spoilers deployed manually. The tail fishtailed once, then straightened, and finally. Phantom 01 rolled to a stop. Phantom 01 is on deck, Morrison reported. Voice hoarse. Aircraft stable, pilot intact. In the tower, no one spoke. Then Colonel Hawkins stepped forward, cleared her throat, and keyed to come. Copy that. Captain, emergency cruise en route. You did good. Welcome home. Minutes later, on the tarmac. Morrison climbed down the ladder on unsteady legs. Rain streaked his helmet. His flight suit was soaked through. But the moment he touched solid ground, he looked up straight toward the hangar entrance. Maya was walking toward him, still in her coveralls, still anonymous in appearance. But this time, not one soul misunderstood who she was. Morrison stood straight, removed his helmet, and saluted sharply. Major Torres, he said. Permission to speak freely? She returned the salute. Granted. He lowered his hand, eyes locking with hers. I owe you my life, and 80 months of apologies. Maya's voice was soft, but her words cut clean. Captain, you owe it to the next person who wears these coveralls. Don't make them have to prove they belong here the hard way. That night, the base was different. The story moved faster than sound. Pilots, engineers, techs, commanders. Everyone had seen the impossible made real. A bomber. Dead in the sky. Saved by a voice they never expected to hear on the emergency channel. Major Maya Torres revealed not as a mechanic, but as the B-21 program's hidden ace. But Maya didn't go to the celebration. She walked alone across the empty hangar floor, checking her logs, reviewing equipment, as if she were still invisible. The next morning, Colonel Hawkins called her in. The conversation was short and life-changing. Your cover is done, the colonel said. You're reinstated as operational flight command. Maya nodded. There's one condition, Hawkins added. You're going to teach them everything. Starting with how to listen to people they don't think are worth hearing. Maya looked up and smiled for the first time in weeks. Why didn't she ever tell them who she really was? That question hung in the air long after the storm had passed, after the lights of the emergency vehicles faded, after the hangar doors closed again. Some said it was humility, others, secrecy, but those closest to her would later say it was something harder to define, something forged in silence, sacrifice, and a kind of pride that didn't need recognition to survive. Captain Jake Morrison didn't sleep that night. Not after what happened. Not after who he'd learned Maya Torres really was. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his quarters, replaying every dismissive word he'd thrown her way, every chuckle, every look, the meetings where he'd interrupted her, the day he'd ignored the thermal warning. He'd almost died, not because of the aircraft, because he hadn't listened. And the only reason he was still breathing was that someone had listened to him, even when he hadn't deserved it. By 0600, Morrison was back in the hangar. He wasn't scheduled to fly. No one expected him to be on shift, but he wasn't there to fly. He was there to find Maya. He didn't see her at first. Until he glanced up, she was on top of Raider 04's fuselage, checking a sensor array, half buried in shadow. Same coveralls, same quiet precision. She climbed down as he approached, wiping her hands. "Morning, Captain," she said, not missing a beat. Morrison hesitated. "Major Torres." He corrected himself. She arched a brow, half amusement, half forgiveness. "Still Maya, Jake." But he shook his head. "No, it's not. Not after yesterday." Maya folded her arms, waiting. "Not cold, just still. I didn't see you." He admitted, "You were standing right in front of me for months, and I never saw you. I thought you were just maintenance. Thought I was the expert." Maya tilted her head slightly. "You were the expert, on flying by the book. And you?" He asked quietly. "I was writing the book." The next week changed everything at Nellis. Maya Torres, no longer Torres the wrench turner, was reassigned officially to operational command as a technical flight advisor and emergency training officer. It was a role built specifically for her, because nothing that existed had accounted for what she could do. She began teaching private sessions for B-21 pilots' manual flight training, emergency thermal management, system override protocols. The first pilot to sign up? Jake Morrison. "Let's be clear," she said during their first debrief. "I'm not here to prove anything. I'm here to make sure what happened last week never happens again." Morrison nodded. "Agreed." She handed him a checklist 7 pages long, handwritten, each line a memory. A lesson learned the hard way during test flights the public would never hear about. "Page 3, she said. "That's the glide profile I used when I brought down Testbird 7 without engine assistance." He looked up in disbelief. That flight was classified. She didn't blink. So was I. Outside the training room, whispers swirled. Pilots asked how a major-level test pilot had ended up undercover in a hangar. Crew chiefs wondered how many times she'd seen what they missed and never said a word. Lieutenants watched her now not with condescension, but with reverence, and when she walked past the aircraft, people stood a little straighter. They didn't salute out of rank. They saluted out of respect. One evening, Webb found her sitting alone near the hangar doors, watching the sunset burn red across the tarmac. "Mind if I join you?" Maya didn't turn her head. "Sure." They sat in silence. For a long time, then Webb spoke. "You know, I've flown with Morrison for over a year. He's a good pilot, smart, confident. Maybe too confident, but I never saw him shaken. Not until you called him from the tower." Maya finally looked over. "He learned something important. That's all." "About aircraft?" Maya shook her head. "About people." That night, back in her small apartment, still sparsely furnished, still anonymous, Maya opened a sealed folder. Inside, a letter, signed, dated, stamped with clearance she hadn't used in years. "You may resume command." It was time to stop hiding, not for herself, but for the next quiet expert no one listens to. The next woman in coveralls who gets passed over, talked over, looked past. And for the next mission, whatever it would be. What happens after you prove yourself to the world, when all you ever wanted was to do the job? That's the part no one ever talks about. Not in the movies, not in the briefings, not even in the locker rooms, because the hardest battles don't always end with the landing. Sometimes they start the moment you take off the mask. 3 weeks after the emergency landing of Phantom 01, Hangar 18 didn't look different, but it felt different. No one said anything outright. No signs were posted. No directives given. But the air had shifted. Respect now moved quieter, deeper. People paid attention. Techs who used to roll their eyes at Maya's detailed blogs now studied her notes line by line. Pilots who'd once chuckled through maintenance briefings now stayed. After asking questions they used to dismiss, and Captain Jake Morrison? He showed up early, every day, sat in the front, listened with a notebook open and questions prepared. Not because anyone made him, but because something in him had changed. It was during one of those after-hour sessions, just Maya and Morrison, left in the room, that he finally asked, "Why the cover? Why let everyone underestimate you for so long?" Maya didn't look up from the schematics she was annotating, because the threat wasn't external, it was inside the system. "You mean security?" "I mean culture." Morrison leaned back, absorbing that. "I was placed here to stay quiet." She continued, "To observe, evaluate. But I learned more about what's broken by being ignored than I ever did from inside a flight deck." She finally looked up. "You want to know what nearly killed you that day, Captain?" It wasn't the storm, wasn't the cooling failure. It was an assumption that expertise only wears flight suits. He didn't argue. He couldn't. Across the base, her presence began shaping more than just emergency procedure. Junior airmen started asking her for guidance, quietly at first. Then openly, one of them, Airman Reyes, asked if she could shadow Maya on a maintenance shift. "You want to carry a wrench?" Maya had asked, amused. "No," Reyes said, standing straight. "I want to understand how things break, so I can learn how to prevent them from breaking people." That night, Maya walked home with a smile she didn't show anyone. Colonel Hawkins had been watching too. She called Maya into her office on a Thursday morning, sunlight streaming in behind her, blinds casting striped shadows across her desk. "You've caused a ripple," the colonel said, setting a coffee mug aside. "Trouble?" Maya asked. "Not even close. We've had more cross-division cooperation in the last 2 weeks than in the past 6 months. Flight crews asking for tech briefings, maintainers requesting flight sim time." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Didn't expect that." No one did. But that's what happens when someone forces the truth into the open. She leaned forward, which brings me to the next part. "There's a test squadron forming at Edwards. Quiet program. Hybrid training track. They want someone who's both a systems expert and a teacher." Maya didn't respond at first. She was quiet, thoughtful, measured. "Is it classified?" Hawkins smiled. "Of course." Maya exhaled. "I'll think about it." That night, she returned to the hangar one last time. The raiders were dark, sleeping. The kind of silence only billions of dollars of dormant weaponry could produce. She walked the line, each one familiar, each one a chapter of her career. And then she stopped in front of Phantom 01. The belly still bore the faint scorch from the emergency landing, a badge of survival. Morrison stood a few feet away, as if waiting. He didn't speak. Neither did she, until finally, "I read your file," he said. She didn't look over, curious, or just embarrassed. "Both," he admitted. "You were flying experimental interceptors at 25. I was still learning how to trim a Cessna. You got here," Maya replied. "That's what matters." "Yeah," he said. "But I brought a lot of pride with me, and I nearly let it kill me." She turned, really looking at him now. "You let it go when it mattered. That's the part no one teaches." A moment passed. Then Morrison asked, quieter, "If you leave, who teaches us next?" Maya gave a small smile. "Maybe." "You do." The next morning, Maya's gear was packed, orders in hand, assignment. Edwards AFB. Designation: Flight Integration Specialist. Clearance: Top Tier Black. But before she left, she pinned a single note to the bulletin board outside hangar. 18. No title, no signature, Just a few lines, handwritten, in clean block letters. Not all pilots wear wings. Not all wisdom wears rank. If you see someone quietly saving lives, look closer. Respect isn't owed to a uniform. It's owed to competence. When the morning crew arrived, they didn't remove it, they read it, and they remembered. What if your greatest legacy isn't a medal or a title, but someone who finally saw themselves in you? That's what no one tells you about doing quiet work. You rarely get applause, but sometimes someone picks up where you left off, and that's enough. At Edwards Air Force Base, Major Maya Torres walked back into a world that had once nearly broken her. This time, she wasn't a ghost in coveralls. She wore her flight badge openly. Her name was printed, not blacked out, and the room fell quiet, not out of dismissal, but respect. Her new position was something between a ghost and a guardian. Flight Integration Specialist, Experimental Systems Command. It meant sitting in classified rooms, writing protocols that might never see sunlight, teaching procedures that, if done right, would only ever be used once and under fire. It also meant flying again. And for the first time in years, Maya walked toward a flight line, not to fix something broken, but to take the stick. The first time she flew again. The mechanics watched her from the tarmac. She noticed not the curiosity, not the admiration, but the surprise, because she still looked like one of them, still carried herself like someone who belonged beneath the plane, not above it. But once she took off, that silence below turned into something else entirely. She flew like she was still part of the machine, like she didn't just control it, she understood it. And the next day, two of those same techs signed up for flight training. Back at Nellis, things had changed. Not because Maya had given a speech, not because anyone ordered it, but because of what happened during Phantom 01's final descent. There was a new phrase floating around the hangar now, quiet, almost reverent, pulling a Torres. At first, it meant noticing something others missed, spotting a problem before it spiraled, making a call others were afraid to, but it grew into something more. It became a way of honoring the unseen, the overlooked, the voices that didn't yell but saved lives anyway. And no one embraced that change more than Captain Jake Morrison. Morrison had become the unlikely face of the shift Maya left behind. He started leading briefings with maintenance included, not as a box to check, but as an equal voice. He pushed for cross-training hours, sat in on tech reviews, stopped using the word just in front of anyone's title, and slowly, others followed. He didn't try to act like he'd always known better. He admitted his failure openly. "I almost let my rank blind me," he said during one closed-door session. "I survived because someone beneath me knew better and didn't walk away." No one challenged him because they all knew who he meant. One morning, a young pilot fresh from training walked into Hangar 18. Her name was First LT Avery Chun. She was sharp, focused, a bit quiet. She had read Maya Torres's declassified emergency report 4 times before stepping foot on base. During her check-in, she stood before the bulletin board, still pinned there, yellowed slightly at the edges. Was the note Maya had left behind. "Not all pilots wear wings." Avery read it in full, twice. Then she turned to Morrison, who had just finished his flight plan. "Sir," she said, "do you think I could request cross-training time in maintenance? Just for familiarization?" Morrison smiled. "You're already doing it," he said. Back at Edwards, Maya heard the stories trickle through the unofficial channels. Someone had pinned her quote to the academy wall. Someone else had named their study group Flight Deck Mechanics. She didn't respond, didn't correct anyone, didn't seek attention. But in her office, Spartan, quiet, hidden in the deepest wing of classified command, she kept one thing on her desk. A flight patch, simple, no wings, just one word: Torres. What happens when someone follows in your footsteps and reaches the same cliff you once nearly fell from? That's when the real test begins. Not of skill, not of training, but of legacy. It was supposed to be routine. A new generation of stealth Pilots had been cleared for their first high-risk training scenario over the desert corridor between Edwards and White Sands. The weather was calm, the birds were tested, the systems green, everything according to plan. But Maya Torres hadn't slept. Something in the telemetry had been bothering her for days. Subtle shifts, inconsistent calibration pings. Not in one aircraft, but across the entire new block of updated B-21 Raiders. No red flags, no system alerts, but Maya had learned long ago, machines don't scream when they fail. They whisper. She brought it to command, outlined the data, showed the trend line, correlated it with known stress patterns under high-altitude atmospheric shifts. The response? Not enough for a systems halt, Major. Keep monitoring. She stared at the briefing room walls, smooth, blank, bureaucratic. That same weight returned, the one she hadn't felt since Nellis, when she stood in a room full of voices louder than hers, trying to save people who thought her concern was just maintenance paranoia. She walked out of the room silently, but this time, she didn't walk alone. In the hallway, a young woman caught up with her. First LT, Avery Chun, the one who'd read her report, who had asked to cross-train, who'd spent the past 6 months watching, learning, absorbing everything Maya had never intended to teach. "Ma'am," Avery said softly, "I saw the report. The same pressure irregularities showed up in our bird on Tuesday. We ran a deep scan, found some minor sensor desyncs. I flagged it." "And?" Maya asked. "They said it was inconclusive." Maya paused. Then, "You think it's going to escalate?" Avery didn't flinch. "I think we're flying with a loaded fuse." That afternoon, a new B-21 Calcine Echo 1 was cleared for an advanced systems endurance run. Avery was in the back seat. A supervising pilot LT, Colonel Rhines, was flying lead. Maya stood on the tarmac, watching the pre-flight with a knot in her stomach. The same sequence, the same subtle ignorance, the same dismissive confidence. Rhines waved her off like he was brushing away dust. "It's green, Major. Your numbers are impressive, but I trust the systems." That line, she'd heard it before, right before everything broke. In the telemetry room, Maya paced. Numbers scrolled across the monitor. Standard flight path, good velocity, stable systems. Then there it was. A pulse, small, too small for the automated protocols, but not for her. The temperature rise didn't match the fuel curve. The timing offset by milliseconds, the sensor delay barely perceptible, only if you knew what you were looking for. She hit the COM switch. "Control, this is Major Torres. I'm recommending immediate system alert for Echo 1. Begin pre-landing sequence now. Pause. Control to Echo 1. Do you copy?" "We're seeing preliminary indicators of thermal instability." From the sky came the voice of LT Colonel Rhines. "Copy, control. Readings look normal on our end. Request to continue current profile." Maya leaned in. "This is not a request." Inside Echo 1, Avery watched her screens, heart pounding, because Maya's voice had changed. It had that edge, the one you hear from someone who knows how fast everything can go from fine to fatal, and suddenly, it wasn't just a systems warning. It was a memory, Maya's, and now hers. "Colonel," Avery said, voice tight, "I think we should return." Rhines gave a half laugh. "First sign of turbulence, and you want to bail? You've got to learn to fly through uncertainty." Avery didn't answer right away, but then her voice came in cold, measured. "Sir, respectfully, this is not turbulence. This is Maya Torres saying we're flying into failure. Back on the ground." Maya stood frozen, because that voice, the tone, the certainty was hers. But in someone else's mouth, Echo 1 banked into a wide arc. Rhines muttered something about caution, protocol, overreaction. But as they turned west, the alert finally tripped, too late. The same thermal cascade that once nearly killed Jake Morrison had found its way into the upgraded fleet. Warnings bloomed, stabilizers bucked, cooling systems overloaded. "Control, Echo 1 declaring emergency loss of digital flight control. Attempting manual override, Rhines reported. Panic creeping in. Then another voice, calm, measured. Avery Chun. Control, I have secondary control inputs. Requesting communication with Major Torres. Maya stepped forward. I'm here. Avery's voice came over crystal clear. Tell me how to fly this thing the hard way. Carl Hawkins was right. Legacy doesn't come from medals or citations. It comes from who you prepare to take your place. And that day, watching Echo 1 limping back across the skies, Maya saw something more terrifying and more beautiful than a falling plane. A reflection of who she used to be and the woman rising behind her. When the next voice sounds like yours and the next hands do what yours once did, how do you let go? That's the final test. Not flying the impossible, not saving the day, but knowing the day no longer needs you to be the one who saves it. Echo 1 came in hard and fast, its flight profile messy raw, but it was holding. Maya stood at the telemetry station, headset pressed tight, her jaw clenched. Every beat of data matched the patterns she remembered from Phantom 01. Same symptoms, same failure path, but a different hand at the controls now. Winds shifting 10 degrees, she called out. Crosswinds at 14 knots correct for it now, or you'll drift. Copy. Avery answered, her voice clipped. Calm. Rhines wasn't saying much anymore, because he wasn't flying, not really. It was Avery now, the second seat. The one who wasn't supposed to be in command, but had been listening from the beginning. And now, just like Maya once had, she was taking control when everything said she shouldn't. Down on the runway. Emergency lights flashed again. Same protocol, same stretch of concrete. But this time, Maya wasn't on the tower mic. She was just watching, because she had said what needed to be said. And now it was someone else's turn to do. Echo 1 kissed down harder than the book would have allowed. But it stayed down. One wheel locked, another dragged. The right wing dipped, then righted. Itself just before full skid. Sparks bloomed, hydraulics groaned. And for a terrifying second, it looked like the aircraft might veer. But it didn't. It held. Because someone, somewhere, had listened. The moment the wheels stopped turning, the runway filled with crews, and behind them, Maya. No one stopped her. No one needed to. She walked calmly, boots echoing against the tarmac, until she reached the ladder. Avery was halfway down, helmet off, sweat down her temples, grease across one cheek, eyes wide but clear. When she saw Maya, she didn't salute. She didn't speak. She just nodded, like a mechanic handing back a wrench. Maya nodded once in return. Nice landing, she said. Avery exhaled. I had a good teacher. In the weeks that followed, Maya submitted her resignation, not from service but from the front lines. She handed over her flight lead to a younger instructor, moved to a civilian integration post, one where she'd oversee systems design, not deployments. Command protested. Pilots objected. But Maya stood firm. Pilots don't fly forever, she said. But if they do it right, they teach forever. She never gave a formal goodbye speech. Never. Gathered a crowd. She just left a sealed envelope in the squadron's ready room inside. Not a citation. Not a medal. Just a note. Same handwriting as the one pinned back at Nellis. Sometimes the best pilots wear coveralls. Sometimes they sit in the second seat. Sometimes they're never invited to speak until it's too late. But if you ever find one, listen, because one day the sky will fall and their voice will be the one that saves you. Back at Edwards, Avery Chun kept flying, quietly, precisely. She taught others what Maya had taught her, and when a young mechanic pointed out an odd vibration in the wing panel of a Raider, Avery didn't laugh. She climbed the ladder, checked the panel herself, and said, "Good eye." Maya Torres never became famous. No feature on the nightly news, no headlines. But across hangars and control towers on bases all over the country, Her story was passed quietly, like a secret worth guarding. They called her just a mechanic. But when the sky began to fall, she became the reason 12 people lived, because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts and walks away before anyone remembers to say thank you.